So capital punishment, also known as the death penalty, in my opinion, is a symbol of America's violent culture. And many prisoners who are sentenced to the death penalty are put on death row for years before they are actually executed, which means that they have to live out their lives in the prisons for years not knowing when their last day is going to be or when the last time they're going to see their families is. And the three claims that I have about this are that the death penalty targets the mentally ill, too many people are innocently convicted, and the death row, it not only negatively affects the prisoners in the prisons, it also negatively affects the taxpayers. And 43% of these prisoners who have been put in prison and sentenced to the death penalty have been diagnosed with a mental illness at some point in their lives, and many of these prisoners that are executed have also had significantly higher rates of mental illness such as schizophrenia or even any dramatic serious personality disorder. And many of these people also had higher rates of childhood trauma, which makes sense that they're lashing out later on in their lives, and it also forces them to live out the rest of their lives in misery, essentially, for one mistake that they might have done that has been caused by any trauma or any mental disorder. And my second claim is that too many people are innocently convicted, and actually 4% of death row inmates are wrongfully convicted, which in the grand scheme of things is a very small percent of error, but that does mean that 4% of these prisoners are killed for something that they didn't even do. And an innocent life, regardless of if the person is innocent or guilty, no one should have the right to take a life. And there are very few cases where there is evidence that proves completely that someone is guilty. So someone shouldn't have the right to take one's life without being completely certain that they did the crime. My third claim is that costs of the death penalty burden taxpayers. And it's very easy for many people to say that the death penalty doesn't directly affect them, because very few of us will ever meet someone who has had a family member who has been sentenced to the capital punishment or has even known anyone who has been put in prison. But the death penalty and the process of capital punishment does affect every taxpayer, because that's what our tax money is, what has been funding the process of capital punishment. Just in California alone, the cost of the death penalty has totaled over $4 billion since 1978, according to the Mental Illness and Death Penalty Information Center. And instead of putting the inmates on death row and sentencing them to death, if we put them in life in prison without parole, it can save over $170 million per year. And this money could go towards another cause, such as maybe donating that money to mental health services to prevent these people from letting their mental illnesses get so far to the point where they do something bad. And in conclusion, no life should be taken, whether it be an innocent or a guilty one. And after hearing my reasons, I hope you'll agree that the capital punishment has a negative effect on not only the prisoners in these prison systems, but also taxpayers.
All right, oddly enough, despite the fact that you had a good preview of the supporting structure of the speech, I think that your proposition is not as clearly identified as it ought to be. And I know what the subject matter is, but your position on it needs to be a lot more effectively explained. At the end of the speech, it's a little clearer, although you are tripping into the area of making a policy claim at that particular point, and so you want to be careful about that. The preview supporting structure is okay with the labels that you've got there. The subject matter, I think most people recognize is a little bit controversial. On your first point, when you're talking about mental illness issues, you've got some statistical information that you present without any source on it. There's no explanation about how those mental illnesses might in fact be in some way diminishing the responsibility of the accused in these particular cases. And there's not an explanation about whether or not that is relevant to the punishment that's being applied here. So I think there's some presuppositions that have been made here that need to be documented a lot more. On the second point, when you're talking about the innocent who might be executed, you've got a 4% statistic that I got no source on. That's wrongfully convicted. And then you equivocate that means that there are 4% who are killed. You don't have an example, you don't have a name, you don't have any illustrations of people who were later proven innocent who were executed. That would be something that would be a little bit more convincing. Also, I think, like I said, you need a source for that 4% statistic. I don't know where it comes from, what it's based on, how it was arrived at. That people are subsequently, they have their convictions overturned. That doesn't automatically mean that they weren't guilty, for instance. And so one of the things that you need to do is to show how the research arrived at that particular conclusion. The cost issue, I think, is a little bit clearer because there is some citation of the sources here. You have in California what we've spent in the last 35 to 40 years. It's almost 40 years that we're talking about. So that's $1 billion every 10 years that you're talking about. So what you need to do is you need to explain why that's significant. What have we foregone? What problems have we had as a result of this? There isn't any information on that. Even the argument that says we could spend $170 million a year, which I guess is the way it breaks down, although again that seems like it's not exactly the same as the $4 billion. Maybe it is, I'm not sure. That wasn't sourced, the other one was. It's probably the same source that gave us that data. But for example, is there an insufficiency in the amount of assistance that provided for mental health there? And then you get into some areas occasionally where there are some value arguments about what is appropriate and whether or not it's right to do particular kinds of things. That, I think, is outside of the purview of what your assignment is, and so that becomes a little bit problematic here. The summary, I thought, was, like I said, pretty reasonable. Your proof needs to be a little more consistent. I thought you did a pretty good job speaking to us, although it does sound a little rushed. All right, thank you.